Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first Higher Ed Live of the 2015 season. This is Admissions Live, and I am your host, Chris Dorso. Our very special guest for our annual Kick Off the New Year show is our State of College Admissions show, and we'll be joined by Scott Jaschik from Inside Higher Ed. We will get to him in just a moment. Admissions Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network, a professional development series. Recorded shows and podcasts always free and accessible to you in our archives at higheredlive.com as well as on iTunes. Be a part of today's live broadcast by sharing your insights and questions on Twitter. Use the hashtag HigherEdLive. We will try to get to as many questions that come in as we can. Today's show would not be possible without the support of all my colleagues here at Stony Brook, as well as our producers, M. Stoner. M. Stoner is a marketing communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. And Admissions Live this year is sponsored by Chegg Enrollment Services. We are very happy to have Chegg support for another year. Recruit, serve, and support students smarter. And you can find out more information about the things that Chegg is doing at edu.chegg.com. And we will get a link out through the Higher Ed Live Twitter account, so you can see all the great things that Chegg is doing to help you make your class. And isn't that sort of what it's all about, as they say? So with that, I want to bring in our guest for this afternoon's show, our editor from Inside Higher Ed. Please welcome Scott Jaschik.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Cool. So, the state of college admissions is always one of the most interesting shows we do every year because there's so very much that goes on in the wonderful world of college admissions. And so we're going to talk a little bit about a report that Inside Higher Ed did last year called the Inside Higher Ed Survey of College and University Admissions Directors, and we're going to pop out a link to this as well so you can download it, and there's just a ton of fantastic data in here, and so we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk a little bit about all the other things that are going on. We're going to talk about the president, we'll talk about everything. So Scott, officially welcome, and what's happening? What's big news today? Break some news right here on Higher Ed Live.
The big news today is, of course, the president's community college proposal. I always judge these things. Sometimes we at Inside Higher Ed are all thinking about something that's big news, and our readers in higher ed are, and the rest of the world doesn't seem to notice. Well, this is an interesting case because everyone is taking note. I was joking with friends here that I flew back yesterday from a meeting, and usually when the person seated next to me asks what I do and I tell them, they say, well, how can my kid get into such and such a college? This time the question was, well, what is this community college thing the president has proposed? It's just sort of out there, and I think it's a huge story, especially if it happens, and the odds are a bit against that. But it really is setting off an interesting national debate about how to get more students into college. And that's what I think is so interesting. A lot of admissions discussion is about how young people can get into the best possible college, or how college A can recruit students away from college B. This is a different discussion. It's about how to get more people into the system. And whatever you think of the president's plan, I would say that discussion is overdue.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I think it's the more you are involved in this field on the broader level, outside of just sort of, standing behind the table in a high school gym, but really looking at it at the macro level, there's a lot that goes into it. And, you talk, it's easy to look at the media stories about, the acceptance rates at Harvard that come out every year and all those kinds of things, but there really is quite a bit that goes into the admissions process and the wide array of options that are out there for students, which doesn't make it any easier on students and their families and whatnot. But I think to talk about community colleges is a good thing. I think there's so much value in what community colleges bring to the table that gets lost in the college debate.
Absolutely, and what I'm curious to see, now we tracked this as the Tennessee legislators were adopting the Tennessee version of the plan. And there was interesting discussion. Not all four-year colleges were super enthusiastic, and some have worried they might lose students. The flip side to that, though, which I think is very important, is transfer admissions. And another way that I think when we talk about admissions, maybe focus too much on the first-time, full-time freshmen. While the reality is these days, an awful lot of students attend multiple institutions, whether or not they start at a community college. And so I also think this discussion reminds people of the importance of transfer admissions. And if this plan were to succeed, either in Tennessee or elsewhere, a lot of four-year colleges might be rethinking their strategies in terms of how to get more of the transfer talent.
That's a very, very good point. We talked transfers a couple of months ago here on the show, and it's, a lot of higher ed folks, think one semester in advance. You talk to faculty, they're talking about, not just this spring maybe, but what they're going to do for the summer, or maybe scheduling fall. Fall's another planet maybe for faculty. But whereas on the admissions end, we're looking at fall 2016 and fall 2017 and beyond, and what we can do now to help impact that enrollment down the road, and looking at the community college piece, certainly a very important part of that.
And actually, your point about timing, I think, and long-term thinking as opposed to short-term thinking is really crucial here, because the advocates of starting at community college like to talk about 2 + 2. Well, sometimes it's 2 + 2, sometimes it's 2 + 4. And what will make a difference and what will really make this effort or similar efforts attractive is if it's 2 + 2, because then the students save money. To do that, and we're seeing some colleges do this, four-year colleges need to pay attention to academic advising at community colleges. Does the community college student who aspires to a four-year degree get good guidance on what will transfer, how to get prepared for certain majors, and so forth? And the colleges that take that seriously, and we're seeing more public and private colleges take it seriously, get involved in the community colleges, they're having good results. Unfortunately, there are still a lot of places that don't spend enough time on this, and so you hear horror stories about people who thought they had 2 years done at a community college and are told that hardly anything will transfer in terms of credit.
Right, yeah, because students now, more than ever, very conscious about that four-year plan, regardless of where they're starting. Very, very good point. So to shift the tables back to freshmen a little bit, and I referred to the study of college and university admissions directors, and the tweet just went out from the HigherEdLive account. Again, if anybody wants to follow along. So the pressure is on now for admissions offices to not just find qualified applicants. It's easy to find qualified applicants, but to find students who will actually enroll if they're accepted. How is that a change from the way things have been done back in the day?
Well, I mean, once upon a time there was an assumption that there were enough students, and colleges may have had different niches, different populations that they served, but they weren't as worried about, as you said at the beginning, filling the class. These days, well, it's different depending on what kind of college you are. These days, it's still the case, as you noted, that there are elite colleges that are overflowing with applicants. But there are a lot of less elite colleges, many of them outstanding institutions where students can get a great education, that don't have the applicant pool that they need or want, or that may have the applicant pool, but the pool doesn't have the will or ability to pay for it. So you have a lot of recruiting going on, trying to attract different groups of students. There's a big theme of the survey was that a lot of colleges and universities are very focused on the so-called full pay student, the student who can afford it, because a lot of colleges don't have as much money as they would like for financial aid. Likewise, colleges look at their demographics and future trends. So you have a lot of colleges, say in the Northeast, which was once considered the center of higher education, who now look at demographic trends and are like, wow, we need more Californians if we're going to be successful over the long run. Even if they still can attract a lot of students from one part of the country, because a lot of students are going to look at the place where high schoolers will know, hey, where did the high schooler a year or two ahead of me go? And so if you are not getting anyone from California or Texas, that's a big deal. So, but everyone is situated differently here, but they're all trying to be sure that they have a good supply.
Now, on behalf of schools that are in the Northeast, which we are, I mean, we kind of are the center of the education world, but that's fine. We won't go into that. It's fine. You mentioned the full pay thing, and so I think that's important. There's been a lot of talk about schools looking at full pay applicants, as you said, particularly in the public sector, where I saw the story a week or so ago that public schools are now more driven by tuition than they are by state funding.
Right.
And I don't remember the framework of it, but the tuition drive is more important even in the public sector. And so, public schools looking at non-residents, international students who are full pay, who are paying out-of-state tuition. And are you seeing pushback from that?
Absolutely. So from 2008 on, 2008, the economy tanked, and states pretty much across the board cut their budgets for public higher education. And a lot of public universities responded in part by saying, okay, we're going to admit more out-of-state students. And while they didn't always say this, what they meant was, we're going to admit more full-pay out-of-state students. Now, the strategy of going out-of-state is not new. And there are places where it has made sense and been very successful for a long time. To cite one of the great institutions of the Northeast, the University of Vermont, for instance, has always had a very high percentage of out-of-state students. Now, Vermont is a small state, so by having a lot of out-of-staters at UVM, they are able to say all of our students, including our Vermont students, get more options, they get more majors, they get more experiences, they have whatever it is that they want. There's a lot more of it than the state could afford if it only admitted Vermonters or only 5% from out of state. So you have states like that. But what we've seen more recently is places like California, where there is no shortage of students, where there's also no shortage of students of great diversity in the state, going out of state largely because they need the money. And again, depending where you are, if you're in a state that is more homogeneous, going out of state can be a key part of your diversity strategy so that students interact with students who are different from themselves. But if you're in a state with every possible nationality or ethnic group, you can't really point to that in the same way. So yes, we are seeing backlash. University of Iowa is under order from the state right now to increase the number of Iowans who attend. And that's causing quite a sort of ripple effect, because as the University of Iowa is heavily now recruiting in-state with scholarships and other efforts, some of the private colleges in Iowa are losing students. Some of the community colleges in Iowa are losing students. In California, Janet Napolitano, who's president of the University of California system, has said it's time to review out-of-state admission strategies, and she has linked a tuition increase that she's pushing against the wishes of Governor Jerry Brown, in part to her ability to then admit more in-state students.
So it would be an in-state tuition increase.
Well, it's an in-state tuition increase, but she's saying if you let us do it,
oh, I see.
We'll admit more, we will cut our out-of-state percentage, because out-of-staters pay much more. And again, if you're University of California, Berkeley could fill its entire class with well-prepared, wealthy out-of-staters. Now, Berkeley isn't proposing to do that, but the reality is that that's sort of a spigot that they can turn on and off. And Napolitano is saying, hey, we will convert more of those slots in state if you let us both raise some more money ourselves and the state provides us with more money.
Okay, so that does, Berkeley can do that. UConn can do that. they can turn on and off the out-of-state spigot. What about, in a state like New York, where we have a lot of smaller schools, a school that maybe has only a population of 5,000, where getting I'm not saying 1,000 out-of-state students, but a decent chunk of out-of-state students really will benefit the school financially. Who's hurt by that?
Well, one, there's the question of what do you do to get those students? And do the students know where they're coming and why? Are their English skills good? Do they have intellectual interests that align with the campus? And what's going on now, and part of why we're seeing backlash, isn't that international students are bad. I actually think there are lots of campuses where international students, and I can remember as an undergraduate even, where you learn so much from international students. But what we're seeing a lot of campuses do now, they are so interested in the tuition revenue, and the populations of wealthy Chinese and Indians have gone up so much that we're seeing colleges, go from a few dozen to a few thousand in 2 years. When a college does that, there are questions about, are they prepared? Is the campus community have the right resources? And are they really thinking seriously about this? I don't want to suggest that colleges can't benefit from increasing their international enrollments, but I'm always a little dubious when I hear a huge surge overnight, because it's very hard to pull that off well without cutting corners.
And it's a hard thing to sustain. Again, looking back to talking about long-term planning and things like that, to keep that pipeline open can be more of a challenge than you think it is, especially when there are cost factors involved. If states are continually raising tuition, how that impacts a student who comes in as a freshman out of state paying X thousand dollars a year, and then that tuition keeps going up and up and up, and all of a sudden the financial resources that may have been there when they started 2 years ago aren't there anymore, and now they're really stuck where they're 2 years in and tuition's up several $1,000s from what it was when they started, and then that takes loans into consideration, and all of a sudden you're dealing with lots of external pressures that weren't there during that recruitment process.
Absolutely. All kinds of things can change. For international students, things like currency fluctuations can be a big difference. People forget, or political changes. So, for instance, people forget that before the fall of the Shah of Iran, Iran was a top exporter of students to the United States. And pretty much overnight, that disappeared. And so when you are relying on foreign students, that can happen. And likewise, it's important to remember part of the concern here isn't about foreign students, but about which students domestically or in various states aren't being served. And here again, I'm not talking about the elites and who gets into the flagship, but most states in the United States, it'd be pretty easy to identify groups by socioeconomics, by demographics, by geography, and say, hey, are we really getting the number of rural students we should be getting? Are we really getting the number of low-income minority students we should be getting? And part of the question is, in this quest for the full payout of state, what about the other populations, particularly that many would say public universities have an obligation to serve?
Very good point. So I'm assuming, of course, you've seen the Ivory Tower.
Yes.
Okay. I saw that myself a couple weeks ago and basically sat with my jaw open for 2 hours. Even though I knew a lot of this stuff. Like, I'm in the business. I totally get it. But at the same time, it was just stunning to see when you actually put the facts and figures on the screen about the volume of student loan debt and all those kinds of things. Obviously, there was a decent amount of media impact there. What do you see? What changes do you see coming out of the Ivory Tower and other things like that?
Well, I see a cumulative impact, and we have some data on this in the survey, of student fear of debt. Now, I think that debt is something to take very seriously and be afraid of at certain levels, but I actually worry that the extreme cases of debt sort of mask manageable levels of debt. And so there are lots of students, there are lots of adults, I would count myself among them, who borrowed to go to college, and I would say it was the best investment I ever made. But I didn't borrow outrageously. And so I worry a little bit that when people talk about the debt issue, they make it sound like all debt is the same debt. And that comes from seeing things in part like Ivory Tower. Even if you read if you listen to the Ivory Tower carefully, I don't think they engaged in this, but there's a lot of exaggeration elsewhere about debt. And so I would really like it if people were more critical about what kind of debt they're talking about. So for instance, there's a really strong case against private loans. I think private loans for many students and their families really are problematic. But I distinguish that from other borrowing, which may have reasonable terms and may, at appropriate levels, not prevent students from pursuing what they want to do after college. So if the message is pay attention to debt, don't borrow thoughtlessly, I think that's a great message, and Ivory Tower contributed to that. But I do worry when I hear high schoolers say, I will only consider debt-free options.
So how do we as admissions folks address that? Because we get the question a lot, even as a public school here, about the cost of tuition and loans versus scholarships and all those kinds of things. How do we address that question without, we try to fight the sales thing
Right.
on the admission side. How do we not come off like used car salesmen, where it's like, oh yeah, you need the moonroof, it's great. Well, yeah, you need to come here because that it's good debt and you're going to get a good job coming out of it. When we can't promise that, we can't guarantee that.
Well,
how do we talk to parents about that?
Sure. I mean, I think honesty and low-key approach is the right way, because again, there may be students. If a student is planning to say become a nurse, well, that's a high salary field right after graduation and lots of demand for hiring. So somebody who's borrowing with a goal of becoming a nurse, or many health professions for that matter, can have a very reasonable expectation of being able to pay back most debt. Somebody who's less sure, and especially who has fewer resources from the family going in, may want to hold off on the exact same debt that would be right for the future health professionals person. So you need to sort of really look at it. We've written about some colleges that are encouraging students to do actual budgets for post-graduation. So to imagine, okay, I'm going to borrow X amount through my years, and so what will my monthly debt repayment be? And then what will be my costs of rent? What is my potential salary? See how it works. Likewise, I think colleges need to be much more honest, particularly about gapping, which tends to lead to private loans. And I think gapping, while there may be students for whom it's good, frequently students, one, don't understand it. So I can use the term gapping because we're talking to higher ed professionals here. In the public, they don't know the term generally, but you hear people talk about gapping all the time. You listen to a call-in radio show and someone says, I thought I was borrowing $10,000, and before I knew it, I was borrowing $70,000, and the interest rates were crazy. I listen to those and I say, you've been gapped. And I think that gapping, which our survey showed many colleges rely on, is the source of a lot of these problems. Whereas colleges that say we can make it work if you borrow $2,000 a year, less problematic. The other thing that I think college admissions people can do, and this extends to your academic advising colleagues after a student has enrolled, is to really pay attention to getting out in 4. A debt load that is manageable if you're borrowing for 4 years can quickly become less manageable if you're borrowing for 6. Plus, you've foregone the income you might have earned graduating sooner. So I think looking very realistically at how am I going to repay, how am I going to get through, and getting through on time. Students who, for instance, change majors. We wrote about a university that requires, as a condition of changing major, student has to meet with a financial aid counselor and say, how is this likely to affect my total cost of attendance? some choices to change major mean you're going to be there 5 or 6 years instead of 4. Well, if you're independently wealthy, that's great. Follow your dreams. But if you're borrowing, you got to think about these things.
Yeah, and I think that really goes into even what we talked about at the onset about the academic advising piece and making sure that you've got that plan. The story I always tell was a student who came in my office at the end of her freshman year, and she was completely panicked because she hadn't done as well. She was pre-med and had not done as well in the science courses that she had taken, the chem and the physics, and was concerned about, oh, how am I going to get through all this in 4 years? And we literally mapped it out with a little grid of fall, spring, fall, spring, fall, spring, and what she would have to do over the course of those next 6 semesters in order to get out in time. When you sort of put the whole degree as a package, when you're talking with students, talking with parents, you're thinking about it as a 4-year plan and not just, oh, I'll major in bio or I'll major in political science and I'll sort of figure it out later kind of thing. Really thinking about the educational process, in which some cases, you know what, spending 2 years at community college might be a fantastic option for you if you know that the courses you're going to get there are going to have equivalence at the in your 4-year plan. You can really have that make that plan early and take the right steps now so that you're on track.
Absolutely, and I think what you're saying here actually points to several issues, not just academic advising, but high school advising. One of the other issues in the news of late, and actually First Lady Michelle Obama has been drawing attention to this, is the inequities in the availability of high school guidance counselors. And students in poor areas are much less likely to see a guidance counselor. And making these decisions in high school age, to be thinking about these things, is very tough, and so that's an important issue. And then the other issue, and this relates to the finances and the borrowing, is it's important for academics to remember that Americans as a whole are just really bad with finance, not just student loans, but if you look at the levels of credit card debt, if you look at the number of people who actually understand mortgages and the way they work, we are not a nation that understands, say, the value of saving. And so when a student and a family hit the college-going years or college-investigating years, you can't assume that they either have a good feel for finance or planning. And and that's unfortunate, but if colleges want to engage with these students and families in helpful ways, they have to step up.
Good points. So I want to talk a little bit about standardized tests,
Sure.
the drumbeat against the standardized testing, the world of standardized tests, the SAT, the ACT. Drumbeat against that has grown louder in previous years. More and more schools going test optional. The SAT and ACT trying to adapt to that, the adding of the writing section, and then the complete overhaul now of the SAT for their next big change. What do you see happening with standardized testing the next couple of years?
Well, I think we're approaching a key point, which is how do people actually react when the new SAT is released? The SAT has lost some market share to ACT in recent years, and as you say, there's a growing drumbeat against standardized testing. And in the past, when a new release of the SAT was planned, we didn't see as much momentum in that period of colleges going test optional. We are continuing to see, a trickle all the time, but it adds up, of colleges going test optional. Most SAT skeptics, I would say, who I've talked to, would agree that the SAT is moving in a direction they would applaud. I haven't talked to anyone at admissions who've said, oh, but I love the old writing test. So people generally feel this is a move in the right direction. But it's going to be when they actually start giving it that I think we'll really be able to tell, because then, frankly, it'll be like the admissions officers who are watching us today. Do you find value in it? And so I do think there'll be a lot of attention and a lot of focus when when we see the shift. But I wouldn't count the SAT out. But at the same time, it faces a challenge. The other big challenge I think is looming for standardized testing is the challenge in the courts to affirmative action. We are probably close to another Supreme Court review of affirmative action, ironically in the same University of Texas case that they sort of settled last year by sending it down to an appeals court, is working its way back up and is likely to return. If the Supreme Court rules against the consideration of race and ethnicity, I think you will see many more colleges, and this has come up in past admission surveys we have done, will go test optional. The reality is that on average, Asian and white students do better than Black and Latino students. And so if you make tests a major part of your admissions criteria, you may have a difficult time achieving the levels of diversity that many colleges want. Likewise, testing has sort of symbolic value, and you see when colleges go SAT optional, they seem to get a boost in minority applications. I don't know what the court will do. Many, including myself, thought they might do away with affirmative action last time round, but they're about to have another chance. And I have a tough time counting 5 votes of which I would be confident that they would back affirmative action.
I think that's we'll have to revisit that in the 2016 State of Admissions.
Absolutely, yeah.
One of our hot topics of things that happen. I didn't know that was coming back. That's very, very interesting. See, you got lots of reasons to keep your eyes on the InsideHigherEd.com, folks. Lots of reasons. And it's funny, it's again very easy to get caught up in the day-to-day of what happens when you're reviewing applications, as we all are this time of year. But to be aware of what's happening, in the political spectrum and how those things can impact what we do in very, very serious ways.
Well, and I think, look, it's a very tough job that you folks in admissions have, because the reality is everyone wants everything. Your bosses want great students, diverse students, students who can pay, students who will be nice, students who will win football games, students who will help you comply with Title IX. They want everything, and they expect you to somehow deliver.
Just go out and do that. Well, yeah. Just admit better students. Why can't we just admit better students? Can't we just do that?
That is, there is, people talk about the way at the end of football season, football coaches get fired. While it might not be quite as dramatic, the reality is there is a lot of pressure and scrutiny on those of you doing admissions. I really respect the difficulties that you face.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge of what we do in enrollment is that, for a lot of colleges and universities, there aren't terribly many revenue-producing arms of the school, and we are a major revenue-producing arm for the greater educational product here, and so I don't get angry at faculty and other departments who say, oh, we'll just bring in more students or just bring in, because from the outside it's very easy to just say, oh, well, just bring in another 300 freshmen and that will, that'll cover it and it's fine, except there's no place to house them, and there's no place for them to eat, and there's no classes to put them in or anything along those lines. So there's a lot more that goes into it than just bringing them in.
Well, and when you guys over-enroll because your yield projections were off, then you get yelled at by the people who want to know why there are 3 students in the lounge.
Yeah, exactly. Why is my son living in a lounge? Exactly. Yeah, ain't that the truth? So, so as we come up on the end of our time here, Scott, is there anything? We talked a little bit about Supreme Court stuff and standardized testing, all that. Like, what kinds of things should we be looking at in 2015?
Well, one, you will see certainly more of the same of everything that we've talked about. I think where you're going to see particularly interesting debates are in places like California, New York, where governors and legislatures have, in fact, given more money to higher ed than they were just a few years ago. right at the height of the economic downturn. In some ways, colleges, I don't want to say they got a free pass, because they certainly didn't, but there was more of a willingness to say, okay, it's crisis time, do whatever you need to do to make it work. Well, now they're giving a little more money, many times not as much as they were before 2008, but they're giving more. And so whenever any legislative body does that, they tend to pay more attention, tend to ask more questions. That's why we're seeing the debate over, say, out-of-state admissions. So these patterns relate to things that aren't strictly admissions issues, but state appropriations and how people feel about the role of higher education.
Awesome. Well, Scott, I appreciate the time, and again, you're going to want to eyeball this survey and see what your fellow your colleagues are out there saying. It is always enjoyable to talk to Scott. Scott keynoted a conference, our SUNYCAP conference last summer, and completely blew our minds. And so it's always a thrill to have him join us. Admissions Live will be back again next week. We're off with the new year, but we'll be back next week. Nicole Lentini, she will talk with Gil Rogers from CHEG and talking about the 2015 social admission report, which is another always really interesting data about how students and parents are using social media in the admissions process. Thanks, as always, to M. Stoner and CHEG, of course, our program sponsors. Coming up Wednesday this week on Student Affairs Live, Heather Gasser will talk about confronting racism on campus. And she has great shows. She just really has great shows. So please be here for that, again, 1 p.m. Eastern. And get reminders about this and all the other great shows that we do here by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. You can browse the archives at higheredlive.com or subscribe to the Higher Ed Live podcast on iTunes. I'm Chris Dorso, back next month with more Admissions Live.